The scream of the chainsaw was a high-pitched, furious sound of violation, a sound that had no place in the quiet peace of my grandfather's land. It was followed by a shower of bright orange sparks as the chain bit into the heavy-duty lock. On our front gate, Gary, the portly and self-important patrol captain of the Homeowners Association, was grinning, a look of pure, malicious joy on his face as he revved the engine. His wife, Brenda, the HOA president, stood beside him, cheering him on like he was a gladiator in the Colosseum. "That's it, Gary," she shrieked, her voice a shrill counterpoint to the saw's roar. "Cut it down. Teach this old man a lesson about compliance." I was standing on the porch, frozen, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. But my grandfather, Jed, he wasn't frantic. He wasn't even angry. He was calm. He had a look on his face I had never seen before, a kind of cold, quiet, and absolute certainty. He slowly stood up from his old rocking chair, turned to me and said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "Stay here, Jake. I'll handle this." He then disappeared into the house. A moment later, I heard a series of heavy metallic clacks from his old study. And then he reappeared, dragging something large and heavy behind him. He set it up on the porch, a dark, menacing shape against the bright morning sun. He unfolded the tripod, mounted the weapon, and then, with a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world, a deep, unmistakable, and utterly terrifying clack-clack, he cocked a belt-fed M60 machine gun. He didn't point it at them. He just aimed it at the empty tree line just behind them, a silent, unblinking sentinel of overwhelming force. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that insane, beautiful, and terrifying moment of checkmate, you have to understand my grandfather. And you have to understand the world he comes from. My name is Jake. I'm a city kid. World is concrete, Wi-Fi, and the constant low-grade hum of other people. But after a particularly bad semester at college, my parents decided I needed a summer of character building. They shipped me off to my grandfather Jed's place, a 50-acre ranch in what felt like the absolute middle of nowhere, I thought. It was going to be the most boring, miserable summer of my life. My grandfather, who everyone just calls Sarge, is a man of few words and even fewer wasted motions. He's a decorated Vietnam veteran, a former machine gunner with the 1st Infantry Division. He's 75 years old, but he's as tough as a gnarled oak root, with a quiet competence that is both deeply intimidating and incredibly reassuring. His world is one of practical solutions, of unshakable principles, and of a profound, unshakable belief in the right to be left the hell alone. In his study, there's a massive, heavy-duty gun safe, a black, monolithic thing against one wall. He'd told me on my first day, "That's my history, Jake. You stay out of it." I had no idea what that history contained. His property is a sprawling, beautiful, and slightly wild piece of land. The last remaining piece of a much larger ranch my family used to own. It's an island of authentic, old-school independence, an oasis of reality. For the last 10 years, it has been completely surrounded by a sea of beige, artificial perfection called Patriots Point. It's an exclusive, gated community, a place where the lawns are unnaturally green and the rules are absolute. My grandfather was not, and never would be, a member of their HOA, and the self-appointed commanders of this sea of beige were the HOA president, Brenda, and her husband Gary, the HOA patrol captain. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be perpetually wound up, a tightly coiled spring of grievances and regulations. Gary was her bumbling, self-important sidekick. They patrolled their quiet, crime-free neighborhood in a customized golf cart with a flashing amber light on the roof, in matching nylon vests that had Patriots Point Patrol embroidered on the back. My first encounter with them was a perfect introduction to their particular brand of madness. I was helping Grandpa fix a section of the old barbed wire fence that separated our property from theirs. The patrol golf cart came zipping up and screeched to a halt. "Excuse me?" Brenda had yelled, her voice sharp enough to cut through the buzz of the cicadas. "The color of your fence posts is not in compliance with the community's approved color palette." All fencing visible from HOA property must be painted a uniform shade of heritage white. My grandfather just slowly straightened up. He was holding a pair of heavy wire cutters. He pushed his old, sweat-stained hat back on his head and just stared at them. He didn't say a word. He just looked at them, his eyes narrowed, his face an unreadable mask. He let the silence stretch out, long and uncomfortable, for a full minute. Finally, Brenda, clearly unnerved by his silent, steady gaze, just huffed, "Well, see that it's dealt with?" They sped off in a cloud of dust and self-importance. Grandpa just shook his head, a small, weary smile on his face. "Don't let the little yapping dogs get to you, kid," he'd muttered, and went back to fixing the fence. But the yapping dogs were persistent. A few days later, I was in the backyard, and I saw them. Not on their side of the fence, on our side. They had found a low spot and climbed over. They were on our property, inspecting my grandfather's massive, beautiful vegetable garden. I was shocked. I walked over, my heart pounding with a nervous anger. "Can I help you?" I asked. Brenda spun around, not even slightly embarrassed to have been caught trespassing. "Yes," she said, pointing at the simple, sturdy tomato cages my grandfather had made from leftover wire mesh. "We are conducting a community standards and safety inspection. These structures are made of a non-approved rusty material. They are a tetanus hazard and a profound eyesore. They must be removed." I just stared at her, my mouth hanging open, the sheer breathtaking audacity of it. They were trespassing on our land to tell us that our tomato cages were too rusty. I told them to leave. Brenda just scoffed, but they turned and, with a surprising lack of grace, clambered back over the fence. When I told Grandpa what happened, his face hardened. The amusement was gone. "At," he said, his voice a low growl, is a line. "At. You. Don't cross a man's property line without permission." End of story. The next day, we spent the morning hammering large, professional, and legally unambiguous no trespassing signs into the fence posts, every 50 feet along the entire half-mile of fence that bordered their community. I thought that would be the end of it. Surely no one would be stupid enough to ignore a clear legal warning like that. I had underestimated the boundless, weaponized stupidity of Brenda and Gary. A week later, was reviewing the footage from the new security camera Grandpa had me install, aimed at the back pasture, and there they were. The footage was time-stamped. At 2:13 a.m., Brenda and Gary back on our property with flashlights. This time they were measuring the distance of my grandfather's old, dilapidated milking shed from the fence line, presumably to see if it violated some setback rule they had just invented. They walked right past a no trespassing sign, their flashlights illuminating it for a perfect, damning moment. This time, Grandpa didn't just get mad, he got strategic. He downloaded the video file. The next evening was the monthly HOA meeting. Grandpa, who had never set foot in their ridiculously opulent clubhouse, put on his cleanest shirt and went. I went with him for moral support. The meeting was a masterclass in petty grievances. After an hour of mind-numbing arguments about the approved height of lawn ornaments, the floor was opened for public comment. My grandfather, to the surprise of everyone in the room, stood up. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He just calmly and quietly presented the facts. He played the video. From the security camera on the large projector screen for the entire room to see, he showed them the clear, time-stamped footage of their president and her husband, the patrol captain, trespassing on his property in the middle of the night. "This is my land," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that filled the silent room. "These are my signs. This is your president, and this is her husband, breaking the law. I am here tonight to inform you and them that this is the last and only warning you will receive. The next time any member of your association or any of its representatives is found on my property without my express written permission, I will have them arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Brenda's face was a spectacular sight. It went from a smug, condescending boredom to a blotchy, furious red. She was being publicly and humiliatedly exposed in front of her own subjects. She started sputtering, screeching about her right as a board member to ensure that no adjacent property poses a threat to the community. But the damage was done. The other residents were looking at her with a new, dawning sense of doubt and embarrassment. I thought for sure that this would be it. The public shaming, the clear legal threat, had to be enough. Grandpa was less certain. "A cornered snake is a dangerous snake, Jake," he told me on the way home. "Ace. Not done. She's just getting started." He was right. The next week, a thick, intimidating envelope arrived via certified mail. It was a CI indicis letter from the HOA's lawyer, but it wasn't addressed to Brenda. It was addressed to us. It was ordering us to stop a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and public slander against the board members as they performed their duly elected duties. It went on to say that if we could not maintain our property to a standard that did not require constant monitoring for community safety, they would have no choice but to petition the county to have our ranch declared a public nuisance. A legal maneuver that could ultimately lead to massive fines and even seizure of the property. It was a declaration of total war. They were twisting reality, painting themselves as the victims, threatening to take my grandfather's home. And then came the final, unforgivable straw. The act that turned my quiet, reasonable grandfather into a man I had only ever seen. In old, faded photographs from a long-forgotten war, my grandfather had one non-negotiable routine. Every morning, he drove his old beat-up Ford pickup into town for coffee with his fellow veterans. It was his social life, his connection to the world, his ritual. To get to the main road, he had to open a heavy iron gate at the end of his long, private driveway. One morning, he went to leave, and his gate was blocked. Brenda and Gary had parked their ridiculous golf cart directly in front of it, boxing him in. He called the sheriff's department. A young deputy arrived, listened to both sides, and, with a tired sigh, told Brenda and Gary to move their cart. But then he turned to my grandfather. "Sir," the deputy said, "I can't make them promise not to do it again. This is a civil matter. I'll have to take it up with the courts." Brenda, feeling victorious, knowing the cops' hands were tied and that a legal battle would be slow and expensive for us, just smirked at my grandfather. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice full of venom. "We'll make you comply. We will make you follow the rules." The next day, they were back. This time, they didn't just block the gate with their cart. This time, Gary was holding a brand new gas-powered chainsaw, and that brings us back to that moment. The moment the saw roared to life. It's the moment Brenda cheered him on. It's the moment my grandfather, my quiet, gentle grandfather, walked calmly into his study. The sound of the heavy tumblers of his gun safe turning in the quiet house, a sound far more terrifying than the chainsaw's roar. He emerged with the M60. He assembled it on the porch with a practiced, terrifying efficiency, the heavy metallic clack of the parts locking into place. The moment he draped a long, glittering belt of inert dummy ammunition over the feed tray, a gesture of pure, unmistakable intent. And the final, beautiful, world-ending clack, clack, clack as he cocked the weapon. The sound cut through the whine of the chainsaw like a thunderclap. Gary stopped, the saw dying with a pathetic gurgle. He and Brenda looked up, and they saw it. Saw the iconic, unmistakable, and deeply menacing silhouette of the M60 machine gun. The pig, as the grunts in Vietnam had called it. They saw my grandfather, a man they had dismissed as a harmless old relic, sitting calmly in his rocking chair, his hand resting on the weapon's grip. He wasn't aiming at them. He wasn't threatening them. He was just there, silent, unblinking. An absolute statement. The statement was, "You have crossed a line. You have brought a chainsaw to a gunfight." "Your move," Gary dropped the chainsaw as if it were on fire. Brenda let out a strangled, terrified squeak. They scrambled back to their golf cart like frightened rats and peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust and the mangled, half-cut lock of our gate behind them. Of course, they called the police. They probably screamed about a madman with a machine gun. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was filled with county sheriff's cars. The deputies took cover behind their vehicles, shouting through a loudspeaker. But my grandfather didn't move. He just sat there. He calmly instructed me to go out and give the senior officer his folder of documents. I walked out, my hands up. carrying the file. I showed the sheriff, a man who looked like he had seen everything, the entire story. The videos of them trespassing, time and time again, legal threats from their lawyer. The video of Gary and the dog in my grandmother's rose garden. And finally, the crystal clear security camera footage from 5 minutes earlier, showing Gary actively trying to destroy our gate with a chainsaw. Then my grandfather calmly walked out, unarmed, and presented the sheriff with another file. It was the federal registration paperwork and the tax stamps for the M60. It was a completely legal, transferable, and registered collector's item from his time in the service. A piece of history. The sheriff looked at our evidence. He looked at the paperwork for the gun. He looked at my grandfather, a decorated combat veteran, and he sent 2 of his deputies over to Patriots Point. An hour later, Brenda and Gary were both in the back of a patrol car, under arrest for felony destruction of property. In a slew of other trespassing and harassment charges, my grandfather had finally decided to press the story of the standoff, of the old Sarge, and his M60 became an instant legend. Brenda and Gary were a laughingstock, their reign of terror over. She was forced to resign from the presidency in disgrace, facing a mountain of legal bills and the open scorn of her neighbors. That evening, I was sitting on the porch with Grandpa, the night finally quiet and peaceful again. "Grandpa?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Were you really going to?" He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady in the twilight. "No, Jake," he said. "That gun hasn't fired a live round in 50 years, and it never will again, not by my hand." He took a sip of his tea, but they didn't know that. Some people like them, they don't understand reason, they don't respect boundaries, they only understand power. Just had to show them, in a language they could finally comprehend, that they had pushed a man who had more of it than they did too far. Sometimes, the only way to ensure peace is to show that you are, without a doubt, more prepared for war. I had come to the ranch to build character. I had left the city a boy. I would be going back a man. A man who finally understood that true strength isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It's about quiet resolve, about knowing, with an absolute certainty, where you draw the line in the sand. And having the courage to defend it with everything you have. Brenda and Gary are facing felony charges, and the HOA is in chaos. But the new interim HOA president is a retired Army general who just sent Grandpa a formal handwritten letter. It complimented him on his excellent display of tactical deterrence and the proper application of the principle of overwhelming force, and it invited him over to compare collections and discuss the current, deplorable state of civilian marksmanship.